Hey guys, this is Megan with Left in Knots, and today I'm going to walk you through the basic construction of one of my most popular patterns, the car seat cloak. This pattern was designed for infants and toddlers to wear over their car seat straps. If you live in a cold climate with children, you will have heard that kids aren't supposed to wear big bulky coats under their car seat straps for safety purposes, but at the same time it gets really cold. So this car seat cloak is a nice way to keep them covered in the car if it's chilly, or as a way to cover them up as you're taking them out to get their jacket on. So I've used this with both of my children, and I'm in the process of making my son another one. And this pattern is one of my most popular, but also one of my most I get the most questions about this pattern and how to construct it. So I wanted to make a video tutorial just to walk you through the certain steps that I get a lot of questions on. This will not be a first stitch to last stitch tutorial. It's like making a blanket. It's a pretty big project. So I'm going to jump around a little bit, but I'm going to go over starting the basics of making the hood, creating the neck hole, and then continuing on to crochet the cloak part, and I will work up through the last couple rows after the armhole. So I'm going to walk you through those steps because those are the steps that I get the most questions about. If you are watching this video on YouTube, a link to this free pattern will be in the video description. If you're watching this on my website, you are probably on the pattern webpage right now. So I suggest that you print the pattern and follow along while you're watching this video, or have two screens running at the same time. So for this project, I am using a 5mm crochet hook and any worsted weight yarn. In my original pattern, I used Lion Brand Vanna's Choice. In the cloak that I'm making now for my son, I'm using Lion Brand Heartland yarn. This is a nice flexible pattern that is not particularly fitted, so you have quite a bit of wiggle room with the size, with the finished size and the child. You have some wiggle room. You can adjust it as they grow and add more rows, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But to begin, you're going to start with a magic circle. If you are not familiar with this technique, I do have a video tutorial that I will link below. And then I'm going to chain 2. And this is the part where you can make your first decision. I have 2 different hood sizes written for this pattern. My original hood size is what I'm going to call the larger size. That starts with 11 half double crochets in the magic circle. The smaller size that I'm working on now is only 10 stitches in the half double crochet, or 10 half double crochet stitches in the magic circle. So you can make your decision. If this is something you want to grow with the child, I would go with the bigger hood. If you just want it for one season and you've got a 24-month to 2T size toddler, the small hood is plenty. So I'm going to demonstrate the small hood with this one. Okay, so I just worked 10 half double crochet stitches into that magic circle, and I'm going to pull tight. If you prefer to start with chain stitches instead of the magic circle technique, you are certainly welcome to do so. If you're not comfortable with the magic circle, don't let that think you can't make this pattern. All right, now I'm going to join with a slip stitch And I'm not going to walk you through every round. Like I said, this isn't a stitch-by-stitch tutorial of this pattern. I just want to show you the main spots where I get questions on the construction of it. And so I'm going to continue following the pattern where it increases from round 1 to round 6. Those will all be increase rounds. So now I'm going to pause. You can work on those rounds, and then when you come back, I will be just finishing up round 6. All right, we're back, and now we have completed the increase rounds. If you started with 10 half double crochet, you now have 60 half double crochet in round 6. If you started with 11, you now have 66 stitches in round 6. So now rounds 7 through 9 will just be half double crocheting around your circle. And I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, but the end of each round is attached to the first stitch of the round with a slip stitch. So these aren't continuous rounds, and that's in the pattern notes. You are chaining 2, crocheting around, attaching with a slip stitch to those stitches, and then chaining 2 and working around again. So I'm going to work those 3 more rounds, 7 through 9, and then we'll come back for when we start to work in rows for the hood part of the cloak. All right, so now I've reached the end of round 9, and I'm going to start row 10. This is where you start working in rows for your hood. I've chained 2 just like normal, and I'm going to start crocheting around the round just as we have been. Half double crochet stitches, but I'm only going to crochet 56 half double crochet stitches. If you are making the larger sized hood, this is where the stitch counts really start to matter, so follow the stitch counts that are on the pattern. Don't listen to my stitch counts that I'm talking about in this tutorial here. All right, so this is the end of row 10. You can see I've still got 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches not worked into of that round, and that's because I am going to chain 2, turn my piece, and then work back for row 11. So instead of continuing that round and attaching it like we have been, we're turning and working in rows now. So row 11 and 12, you will have the same number of stitches across. That will not change. I'm going to go ahead and finish those rows. And then for row 13 through 20, you will have some change in stitch counts. There will be a few increases. And then decreases again, just for some shaping of the hood. All right, so now we've finished all the way through row 22 on the small sized hood. Now is really the time where I want you to pay close attention, because these are the places where I've had, over the years, people have a lot of questions and get hung up. So on your hood, this finished edge, what you were just stitching along, this is where the face will go. So imagine my hand is your child's face. This will frame the face. This will be their neck, which makes this raw edge here, this unfinished edge, part of the neck hole. And so that's an important thing to understand for this next step, because now we are going to chain 1, and we are not going to turn. We're not going to turn back to work on these stitches. We are going to continue to work along this raw edge instead. And we're going to work 48 single crochet stitches evenly across that unfinished edge. Since these are unfinished since these are not unfinished, but since these are raw edges, your stitch placement is going to some degree be up to your discretion, but you want to work them as evenly as possible across this distance from here, from this part here to this part over here. 48 single crochet stitches. All right, one good checkpoint, I'm about halfway across now. One good checkpoint is, since we want 48 stitches across this entire length, once you get to the center point here, you should be at about 24. If you're not, take some stitches out and add a few more so that we've got stitches evenly dispersed across this distance. Okay, so let me hide my tail there so you can get a nice view of that. Now you can see this edge just looks a bit cleaner. I've single crocheted 48 stitches from one end to the other, just to kind of clean up that edge. And again, this is making part of our neck hole. So the next part of this process is the other part that people get a little bit confused about. Right now my hood is upside down. So this is the neck hole. I'm going to chain stitches and attach it to this side so that that will complete the neck hole. And then once you see that connected, I'll flip it right side up and it'll all make sense. Because then from that neck hole, we're going to continue right on. This is all seamless, which is really nice. We're going to continue right from creating the neck hole right on to creating the blanket or the cloak part of this project. So now I'm going to chain 22. I'm going to take my chain, you'll notice I just flipped my project. This is that edge that I just crocheted across. Here's my chain 22. I'm going to take this and I'm going to connect it to that first stitch that I just crocheted along that unfinished edge. So that first of 48 stitches that I just crocheted across that unfinished edge, that's where I'm going to connect to with a slip stitch. So now, hopefully you can see a little bit better. It's hard to fit this project within the frame of the camera. This is what we just did. We crocheted from this point here, 48 stitches. Let's see if I can get the light better. 48 stitches along this raw edge, this unfinished edge. Then we chained 22 across this gap and connected it back to our first stitch of that unfinished edge. So this equals a total of 70 stitches around, and that is the same for both sizes of hood. So now the patterns are identical. The blanket or the cloak part of this pattern are the same size. If you want to make it longer or shorter, you sure can, depending on the height of the child or the size of the car seat that it's going to be going over. But from this point on, we're talking the same stitch counts for both sizes of this pattern. So one more really, really important step right here. I just connected this with a slip stitch to the first of those 48 stitches. And now I'm going to chain 2. Do not turn. This is important. While we're working on the cloak part, you are not turning. So this first, what I'm working on now is round 1 of the cloak. This is going to be chain 2 and half double crochet 70 around. Because like we talked about, we have 70 stitches around this head hole area now. If you turn here and start working into these chain stitches first, your armholes are going to end up in the wrong places based on the stitch counts. So it's really important that you do not turn here. Everything else is easy, no problem, because you're just doing half double crochet stitches, 1 in each stitch around. So there's no real counting on this round. So I'm going to finish up this round, and then I'll come back and talk about the few rounds we have of increases before we add the armholes. Now I have crocheted 70 half double crochet stitches around that neck hole. The chain 22 was were the last part of that I worked into, and I worked 1 stitch directly into each chain stitch. So now I'm going to connect to the first stitch of that round with a slip stitch. Pull it tight. And now you have several rounds of increases. In fact, you keep increasing each round of the rest of the project to make that nice circular shape of the blanket part of the cloak. The first increase is 2 half double crochet in your first stitch. So I'll chain 2, work 2 half double crochet there in the same stitch space, and then a single half double crochet in the next stitch, and then repeating that around. So this next stitch will be 2, and 1. Two, and 1. So that's the repeat around. At the end of that round, you'll have 105 stitches. At the end of round 3, you'll have 126 stitches. And then at the end of round 4, you're going to have 140 stitches. And from that point on, each round after round 4 is going to add 10 more stitches. So now I'm going to show you a couple things on a project that I'm already partially finished with. Okay, so here is the project once you get into the blanket part of the cloak a little bit. Here's my hood, neck hole here, and then we've got the start of the blanket. On this one, I'm going to show you a couple things. First, get these strings out of the way. I'll show you what the armholes end up looking like. They're really easy. They're just slits. So basically, once I finished round 10, on round 11, I followed the stitch count in the written pattern, and then you chain 15 stitches and skip 15 stitches from the previous row before you start your half double crochet stitches around again. And then that creates armhole on one side, and then there's obviously a matching armhole on the other side of the piece as well. So if you follow the stitch counts in the written pattern, you will get those armholes no problem. And if they are in the wrong place, that means you turned your piece when you started working on the blanket part around that neck hole. If your armholes end up kind of in the front and the back of the piece instead of on the sides, you turned your work. So make sure you don't turn your work. And if your armholes are in the correct spot, you'll be able to fix it by ripping out your stitches back to that point and making sure you don't turn your piece when you start working around. That's just a really common problem I've heard people mention before. The second thing I'm going to point out is once you get to the point where you're increasing evenly each round, like each round is increasing by 10 stitches, I like to use stitch markers, and honestly my favorite stitch markers are bobby pins, but use whatever you prefer. I like to use stitch markers for my increase because then it can turn into kind of a mindless project. You just crochet up to your stitch marker. Once you get to your stitch marker, you take it out. You'll work your 2 half double crochets into that space, place your stitch marker again into those stitches you just crocheted, and then continue. And I'll show you what that looks like. Because this part is big, and if you had to keep counting it, it'd be really, I mean, I don't like counting that many stitches. I'm not a big user of stitch markers, but in this case it's totally worth it because then you can just kind of mindlessly half double crochet along. Oops. Until you reach your next stitch marker. In each row, your increases are going to get further and further apart too. I like bobby pins because they don't tangle and they don't seem to snag much. They're sturdy, they're not plastic, they're not going to snap. And you can get a lot of them really easily. Okay, so you see here, I'm coming up to that stitch marker. I'm gonna half double crochet in each stitch up to that stitch marker. Now here's my stitch marker. I'm gonna take that out. I'm going to work 2 half double crochet stitches into where I just took that stitch marker out. And then I'm going to place the stitch marker back into the first of those 2 stitches. So not the stitch that is closest to my hook right now, but that first stitch that I worked into that space. I'm going to add the stitch marker, and then this is where my increase will be in the next round. So that is pretty much it for this car seat cloak. You can continue as many rounds as you want to make it however long as you want. You could even have some extra yarn around, like if you have like say a baby in 12-month or 18-month clothing this year, you know you're going to want to use this car seat cloak for a few years because the weather is always miserable in the winter, let's be honest. You could even have some of the same yarn around and add a few rounds the next year to make it longer so you don't have to start from scratch again. That is something that I think would be fun and easy to do. But really you can customize these any way you want. I've done stripes, I've done edging around the hood and the bottom. So this is a really nice base pattern, and then you can customize it for different kiddos. And it's really a nice thing to have if you live in cold winters. So I hope you enjoyed this pattern. If you want the free pattern, again, if you're on YouTube, that link to the free pattern will be down in the video description. If you're on my website, you can search car seat cloak or go into my free patterns page and it will be there. I also have a pattern for a bulky car seat. I call that one a poncho. That one does not have a hood and it's made with super bulky yarn. So if you want something that works up a little bit faster or is a little bit heavier weight, You can also check that out. That one is called a car seat poncho, and that is also on my website. And I also have a lot of other free patterns for winter, summer, and everything in between on leftandknots.com. So I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial. I hope this helps clarify some of the common issues that we've had with this pattern in the past. And I can't wait to see your projects. So be sure to come to my Facebook community or tag me at Left and Knots on Instagram so I can see and share your projects. Have a great day.